Please be seated if you are able, and we'll begin.
Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Church of Evanston for this celebration of life. Welcome to those who are joining us online as well. We're here to honor the life and mourn the death of Jerome Joseph Galich, Jerry, a devoted husband, a loving father and grandfather, and a faithful brother and friend. He was a talented artist and musician, a kind and open-hearted person. Jerry was almost unstoppably playful and fun-loving. We come together to remember and honor him, to grieve together because we will miss him dearly. But more importantly, we come together to celebrate him and his indomitable spirit. We come together to celebrate not just his spirit, but the spirit of all life, to lift up laughter, story, and song, because that is how we can honor him best. Together, let us be thankful for the ways our lives have been made more joyful and rich by knowing him. Together may we find comfort and provide comfort to Jerry's family, his beloved wife, Lorna, his children, Abby, Gavin, and Paul, and his grandchildren, Selena, Sam, Sophie, Addie, Owen, and Riordan. May we find comfort together in the ageless words and music of poets, philosophers, and faithful people, and may these be reminders of the beauty and sacredness of living. May we be assured that our lives have value and meaning beyond our presence here, and may we know that love, beauty, and goodness endure. In the words of the late UU minister A. Powell Davies, let us be honest with death. Let us not pretend that it is less than it is. It is separation, it is sorrow, it is grief. But let us neither pretend that death is more than it is. It is not annihilation. As long as memory endures, his influence will be felt. It is not an end to love. Humanity's need for love from each of us is boundless. It is not an end to joy or laughter. Nothing would less honor a vibrant soul than to make our lives drab with excessive grief. Let us be honest with death, for in that honesty we will understand him better and ourselves more deeply. This service will truly be a celebration of a life well lived, with reflections by Jerry's children, grandchildren, and friends, interspersed with beautiful and joy-filled music. As we listen and take it all in, let us hold his memory with the bright spark of love and laughter he brought to us. As Abby, Gavin, and Lorna come forward to light the chalice flame, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, please read responsively the words found in your program. In our time of grief, we light a flame of sharing, the flame of ongoing life. In this time when we search for understanding and serenity in the face of loss, we light this sign of our quest for truth, meaning, and community. And I invite Abby and Gavin to come up as soon as you're done, bringing Lorna back to her seat.
Hopefully you can see me out there. I am back here. You can hear me, I'm loud. Welcome to family and friends, and to friends that Jerry hadn't gotten the chance to meet yet. Trust me when I say that Jerry was your friend too. Welcome to my father's worst nightmare, a celebration that he's not attending. It is driving him nuts. We will try to do justice this morning to my father's unique character, to his big heart and relentless curiosity, to his love of music and laughter and of art and of talking to random strangers in restaurants and hardware stores and pharmacies and any retail establishment, any non-retail, whatever. The point is, Jerry loved to talk to people, and the stranger they were, the more of a stranger they were, both of those work, he loved to talk to and meet new people. It was a gift that came easily to him. For example, when I was in high school, friends organized a surprise party for me at my house, and the ruse to get me away while they showed up was for my dad to ask me to go to the grocery store with him. That was it. I don't even know why I went, except that, truthfully, a trip anywhere with Jerry could be pretty entertaining. Anyway, the grocery store was only a few minutes away. He only needed a few items, so all told, the trip should have lasted 10 minutes. But Jerry figured once we were there, he would stall by finding strangers to talk to. That was the plan. And it worked like a charm. Within minutes, he had run into a person, technically not a stranger because he had met him once years prior. It was a gentleman who had bought our family car. They struck up a conversation that lasted 20 minutes until my dad was the one who had to cut it off. I don't know what they talked about. I don't think it was about the car. The car was a Ford Maverick. The only interesting thing about it was bright green. It's a weird story to remember, but I think I took note of it because it was so different from my own self-conscious approach to life. Of course, I didn't appreciate my dad talking to strangers when I was younger. It was mostly embarrassing when he talked to the teenage ice cream scooper about her being left-handed, or to the couple whose house he admired while on a walk and subsequently got invited into for a look around. But the older I got, the more charming his extroversion became. By the time I went to college, I was begrudgingly appreciative of his ability to form connections. During a visit to U of I for their dad's weekend, that's what my name tag is about, by the way, he was delighted to join me, and more importantly, his new young friends at a frat party, drinking stale keg beer and dancing to Love Shack. And he agreeably capped off the night with us by sharing a pound of greasy French fries, because that's what friends do. By the time I was an adult with my own embarrassed children, my dad's outgoing nature was the thing I admired about him the most. Even when he was sick, he couldn't help wearing conversation-starting Hawaiian shirts to his treatments every day. He said hello to everyone who passed by him at the hospital, at Three Crowns where he was living, and on the walks we took. This was as natural to him as breathing, like he literally could not say hello. And it might be rubbing off on me. I'm decidedly not an extrovert, but the other day I found myself conversing with a waitress about her beautiful and detailed cicada tattoo. I told her I had just started hearing the cicadas that morning, and she informed me that cicadas are one of the loudest animals, and so my conversation with this stranger began. You have been given name tags this morning with instructions to fill in the blank. Ask me about. That's so we can all have wonderful conversations with each other today. After all, as my dad should have said, he didn't, Will Rogers beat him to it, a stranger is just a friend I haven't met yet. So thank you all. Thanks for being here, and don't be a stranger.
You guys want to take a break? Feel free. Actually, it's not this long. I printed 2 copies. All right, can you hear me? All right. So I strode into the Unitarian Church this morning. I hadn't been here in a while. Felt a little strange vibe. I haven't seen the place in a while. I haven't seen the people in a while. I can't figure out what quite that strange vibe is. And I'm noticing everybody is wearing their masks. That's what it is. I'm feeling kind of Trumpy, kind of Republican-like. Trust me, I've had 2 shots plus my boosters, so I'm all good. And we don't want to talk politics because Jerry would never want to do that himself. Okay, all right. So warning to the uninitiated, in case you haven't noticed, we, the immediate family, for the most part, for these occasions, lean in the direction of levity, err on the side of irreverence. on the direction of levity, err on the side of irreverence, not inappropriate when discussing Jerry. This, of course, is the year 2022, and for those of us who are connoisseurs and indeed advocates of modernism, and as everybody is undoubtedly already aware, this marks the 100th anniversary of the publication of James Joyce's magnum opus on modernism, Ulysses. And as with all good and pious modernists, I too feel obligated to tackle Joyce's masterpiece yet again. I say once again because I'm pretty sure I must have read this at least twice before. Admittedly, grinding to a halt the first time in chapter 3, after what can only be described as experiencing first person the character of a prevert on a beach. Yeah, stream of consciousness. And the second time, making it all the way to at least chapter 8. That is, if the dog ear of my used copy was indeed my dog ear. So now the problem, of course, is that Ulysses, as we all remember, is Latin for Odysseus. And Odysseus, as we all remember, is the father figure, both literally and figuratively, of the Greek classic and seminal work of Western literature, the Odyssey. And the Odyssey, as we all remember, is the basis for James Joyce's Ulysses. So ipso facto, if one is planning on reading Ulysses, one really should start with a refresher on the Odyssey. Where in God's name is he going with all this? Bear with me. So the Odyssey. My recollection of my prior reading of the Odyssey was, 1, the Greek gods were super cool. Number 2, they loved their feasts even more than Charles Dickens. And how about that Athena? She does it all. Unlike the situation in my house, where the male rules the roost and does his fair share of the work. So as we all remember, the Odyssey is, amongst other things, a reconciliation between a father and a son. Odysseus is on a long and grueling journey home after being away for 10 years, fighting perhaps the seminal epic war, the Battle of Troy, while his son, Telemachus, is sitting at home poolside, smoking a stogie, enjoying the bathing beauties and living a life of general debauchery. No comparison yet, by the way. So while his fellow toga-clad debauchees surround him, fascinated by the stinky-smelling tobacco stick that is dangling from his mouth, and about which, of course, they have no reference, as cigars have not yet been invented, well, lo and behold, who should show up in her winged slippers, dressed as a male lord, but Athena herself? Oh yes, the Odyssey is filled with cross-dressing. Long story short, she clears the pool deck of rabble-rousers, rips the stogie from Telemachus' mouth, and demands he get off his lazy ass and go find his dad, both in the literal and figurative sense. Telemachus, blinking slowly in disbelief, responds with, "Yes, ma'am, sir," and he is off in Athena's wake on his own journey. Meanwhile, as we all remember from the story, Odysseus on his way home is stuck on a procession of exotic islands, meeting an assortment of really quite creepy gods, goddesses, children of gods and goddesses, the latter of whom, by the way, are without a doubt the creepiest. But it is on the strange and tranquil island of Hartzell-Aucus where our story begins. Our story begins? It is here that Odysseus lands unceremoniously, washed ashore in tattered toga, saber still clinging to his side, mysteriously drawn to the melodious sound of what can only be made by a god. In fact, the god Geronius. Admittedly a rather minor god, playing what Odysseus assumes is some sort of conch shell because he has no concept of a trumpet, playing what he can only describe as an incredibly groovy, sonorous melody, because again, he has no concept of jazz. So Geronius, as we all remember, is the god of bourbon, jazz, and non sequiturs, a very mellow god. Odysseus, making his way to the mount from which this oh-so-cracking, syncopated rhythmic music is coming from, pulls out his saber in anticipation of a duel to the finish, when suddenly, interrupting the music, he hears a loud, shrilled voice shouting, "Jerry! Jerry!" at which, out of fear for his own life, he drops his saber and runs for cover. Jerry is, of course, his wife and the goddess Lornestra's nickname for him. Well, quite to the contrary, the vibe in Hartzelakis is anything but confrontational. Our Odysseus, after he is offered a bourbon, and then a second, and even a third, is finding this strange exotic land quite pleasurable, and one for which he can perhaps stick around for a while. He finds these strange people love their parties, for which they throw many in his honor. He is even given the pleasure at one of these parties of meeting their son, the Prince Gavinicus, who he finds, frankly, to be quite snide and sarcastic. And he is feasted at their table, for which Lornestra provides quite an elaborate spread. And to do as the Romans do when in Rome, he wonders where that expression that just popped in his head could have come from, because Rome per se doesn't exist yet. Doing as the Romans, he spills all over his toga as he sees his host, the great god of bourbon and merriment, Geronius, himself has done. It is after a night of merriment, sitting on what looks like a boat deck attached to the back of the castle in the depths of North Arcadianston, that Odysseus finally has the chance to ask from whence the great Geronius has come, from what heritage is his illustrious family derives, and what great exploits he has performed in his remarkable life. The great Geronius tells of his humble beginnings from what they call on the island of Hartzelakis, the south side. The great Geronius tells of a proud family that comes from a Slavic race that will one day inhabit the land which will be known as Croatia. But Odysseus shouldn't ponder it too hard, as again, this time warp thing is kind of difficult. He tells of a childhood barefoot, scantily clad in the robe of a peasant, dancing on grapes in his cellar, preparing wine, and given that he's just come in from the backyard without washing his feet, adding to it just that right amount of je ne sais quoi terroir. He tells of a youth being educated, if not exactly by Plato in the gymnasium, at least by CPS, literal gymnasium. If not to enlighten, at least to amuse and entertain, especially in the form of that aforementioned brass conch shell. He tells of a higher education schooled in the visual arts from whence he met the beautiful, strong-willed, and opinionated goddess Lornestra, from which it was foreordained they should be together, and she would forever call out, "Jerry! Jerry!" whenever she felt him going astray, or just whenever. He tells of his proud, if somewhat risque, exploits in his higher education days, most of which we will skim past, with the exception of the time during a festival that he walked down the city market square wearing the costume of a Nazi SS officer. What was he thinking? Odysseus, although thoroughly confused, picks up on the edginess of it. The great Geronius tells of his proud family, 2 daughters, who led and continue to lead exemplary lives, his wonderful 6 grandchildren that he loves so dearly and is so proud of, his 2 sons-in-law. And the prince, Odysseus reminds Geronius, you must be so proud. Did I mention my 2 sons-in-law, Geronius says? He tells of proud moments of leading the many marching parades, playing his brass conch shell, teaching his grandchildren the mystery of the circle, the great march of Cub Scouts Pac 12 in which he proudly flew the flag of peace amidst a barrage of criticism and hypocrisy. Oh, Dad, speaking of politics, the obnoxious Prince Gavinicus interrupts. Remind me, exactly how many times out of 3 did you vote for Nixon? Odysseus does not want to leave the land of Hartzelakis as he finds the land and people comforting, the feasts, especially the cheese trays and crackers, fulfilling, and the conversation, although strange, stimulating if not occasionally hilarious. But as we remember, Telemachus, with Athena quick on his heels, cracking the whip, is on the quest to rediscover his father. And as we all remember, the heart-rendering scene of Telemachus sheepishly approaching his father Odysseus occurred on the front yard of Geronius's Hartzelakis castle, with Athena poking Telemachus from behind with her trident. Go on, give him a big hug. Telemachus, not sure of his father's response, but not appreciating the sharp tine of the trident poking his ass, is forced to approach his father and shyly enwraps him in a big bear hug. And to everyone's relief and delight, Odysseus responds in kind, and they stand in an embrace. Gavinicus, coming out on the front porch and witnessing this scene, turned to his father, the great Geronius, and asked, "What's going on?" Geronius explains, "Telemachus has at long last found his father. They are embracing. They are having a moment." And he looks anticipatingly at Gavinicus, who retorts, "What the hell are they doing that for?" Thank you.
I love Jerry Galich. Jerry and Lorna were the first people I met. Okay, yeah. I love Jerry Galich. Jerry and Lorna were the first people I met in 1971 when I first came to this church. They were my first acquaintances and remained that way all these 51 years. We had a lot of good times. I think you may not know some of the things Jerry did way back then. For instance, there's a number of people that were involved in the Forum or Cracker Barrel in recent years. Well, back then it was called the 9:30 gathering. The service was usually at 11, and at 9:30 a bunch of us met back there by the windows. Jerry, me, John Heimbaugh were the coordinators, and we would say, well, what's the topic going to be today? And half a dozen or a dozen people might come and sit and we'd talk. Our minister at the time, Charles Edis, would join us. And it was a lot of just give and take. It got more formal, and then we backed off, let people who know what they were doing run it. You recall, well, no, you wouldn't know this. There was a play reading group that started about 40 years ago. Names you may not recall. Harry and Jean Nachman, Rich and Caroline Carlson, Shirley and Will Foss, Jerry and Lorna Galich, Harry and Libby Hirsch. And we read plays. We met every other month, every other month. And the theme was, Rich wanted us to rehearse and have sets. And we said, no, none of that. I mean, you think Jerry would go for that? No. The director, who was the host or hostess, would select a play. We got to their house, they'd give us the play, they'd give us the part and say, go. We read cold, and it was wonderful. Jerry was part of organizing that. Lake Geneva Fall Weekend Retreat, the adult weekend retreat in late September or early October. Jerry and Lorna's cabin room was the focal point. A bunch of us would go up Thursday night to do the walk from Williams Bay to Lake Geneva. Jerry would summon us with his trumpet at 7:30 in the morning. Come to our room and have breakfast. He was our leader, and then we would make the walk to Lake Geneva. It was about, 3 hours or so? And we'd stop, look at things along the way, and stop and chatter and what have you. Go to Popeyes, that was the restaurant we all went to, and then come back. Lots of good times. I have something on my card here which says, ask me about canoes. There was one year, several of us did a father and son canoe trip, whitewater canoeing in Wisconsin. Andy Sohn, my stepson, Gavin, Jerry, Sean Talmadge, Bill Lipscomb, and John Heimbaugh. And so we had 4 canoes, 3 or 4 canoes. And I recall we were outfitted with all the latest safety equipment, helmets, life jackets, and we're paddling along, and we got to one place, a bend in the river, and here were a bunch of Wisconsinites, cheeseheads, in their inner tubes with 6-packs on their bellies, laughing at us. All this. And there was a time, Jerry was paired up with Sean, and I think they turned over. They flipped over once, and we couldn't find Sean for a while. And he showed up. One more thing. You see this pink flamingo? It was one of Jerry's, Gavin, you and Abby would know which one. Was he 60 or 70? And either the family or a bunch of friends put dozens of pink flamingos on their lawn. And Jerry got up the next morning to see these whole flock of them waiting for him. So, Jerry, I miss you. I love you. But I'll never forget you.
How many tall people? Cats. We have it. Jerry was a lovely friend. So I thought I would simply speak about the fun memories I have of him over the last 40 years here at UCE, both real and imagined. Professionally, Jerry was an ad man. You know, think Mad Men. That's it, okay? Constantly oozing creativity from every pore. He met his counterpart, Lorna, at the Art Institute of Chicago, where they were both students. They were a zany couple, and it's hard to imagine one without the other, like frickin' frack. Everything about Lorna was tiny. It was her mojo. So it was no surprise that they bought a tiny house to raise their not-so-tiny family in Evanston. It was a doll's house, really, barely large enough for them, let alone for its destiny as party central. They laughed and loved and bickered their way through many well-orchestrated events that took place there, with an always room for one more attitude. I heard that house had magical qualities. It had concealed secret compartments that automatically expanded the space every time it got crowded. This was useful because the space immediately became expanded and often moved to the outdoors for the wonderful occasions such as weddings, showers, birthdays, the 4th of July, an annual event that lasted all day and included a parade. Lorna and Jerry loved entertaining, and that's what they did best. They were naturals. One year, for Lorna's birthday party, unbeknownst to everyone, Jerry hired a mariachi band for her party. Now, I don't mean a combo. No, this is a band, at least 15 people, and their instruments are filing into the house. I think they came by bus. Well, why am I saying this? Well, the mariachi band came and played and sang, and everybody else sang and swayed and just loved the whole thing. Well into the night. Then there was a bagpiper. He came next. And he came to celebrate Lorna's Scottish heritage. And he joined right in. Everyone had a wonderful time. The UCE clan plus every other person they knew. Will and I were newbies in those days when we first came to UCE. And Jerry had such a knack for welcoming with big bear hugs. Who could resist this man? He had a great love and passion for our church and its people. He worked hard for it and supported it all his life. Such a gift to us. Speaking of gifts, you've already heard about the very famous flamingos. And I have to mention they were Jerry's favorite animal. And this is the most physically unlike creature from himself in the entire animal kingdom. It captured his heart. We all knew it. And when Jerry turned 60, maybe 70, it was considered humorously that we should have 65 flamingo yardbirds, the ones that were so popular back then that you just stick in the ground. we should have like a flock of them on Jerry's front lawn. And so it was considered humorously, but then mysteriously, 65 of these guys landed on Jerry's front lawn to greet him on his birthday morning. He absolutely adored this avian flock, creating a giant cloud of pink on his lawn. No one actually knows how these birds came about, and it is a secret to this day. 65 big pink creatures hung around for several years in various configurations. I'm sure there's a beak or a wing still lying there someplace, probably in the basement. Can you imagine being loved by that much by your favorite animal? That was Jerry. Now, Will and I called Jerry's house, I don't need this. Will and I called the Galich house the Vortex. Because once you were in there, you could not get out. You could never just stop in to drop something off. Oh, just forget that. Oh, 3 hours later, you were standing around drinking mint juleps and having a great time. Maybe more people showed up, caught in the vortex as well. Maybe he'd rope you into helping him build something, like an exact replica of a 1,000-year-old fence he saw at an Art Institute Japanese exhibit, made of 100 tiny little pieces of wood. No Home Depot fence for Jerry. No one minded, no one was surprised. Everybody pitched in or gave advice. It was just Jerry orchestrating the whole thing. He was just a magnet for this sort of activity, kind of like Tom Sawyer. Always busy, and pretty soon, you would be busy too. Digging a fish pond in the backyard, but not dressed for it. So what? It was fun. Any excuse for a party. Labor Day, Kentucky Derby Day, Groundhog Day, April Fool Bagels Day. I mean, it's all good. And, then maybe Lorna might ask him to run down to the Jewel because she needed a dozen eggs really quick. This was the time before cell phones. 3 hours later, he came home and he forgot the eggs. He met some cronies at Jewel and went out for lunch, probably at Prairie Joe's, and left the eggs there. It's probably where he met up with the mariachi guys. That was life with Jerry, always a little unpredictable, in a good way. Lorna would just roll her eyes. Well, the UCE bunch spent long weekends together at an adult retreat in Lake Geneva every fall. We planned the whole thing, and it was always wonderful. There was play reading, adverbs, games, art, music, fabulous service planned by us, for us. We always invited one of the ministers to do a workshop, and we were a pretty raucous group, and we played hard. Jerry made sure we were up bright and early every morning by going out on the balcony to play reveille on his trumpet for us at dawn. This was not always appreciated by others, in earshot. Well, those were the days with lifelong friends. I will never forget them and how much of Jerry's energy was involved. And I have vowed that every time I see a flamingo, we will wink at each other, me and the bird, and then we'll stand on one foot. And a little corner of my heart reserved for Jerry will just flip-flop. And the bird will soar high in the sky at dawn, just as reveille sounds on the trumpet, but very softly.
Look at all of us here together for a very good reason. First, I would like to say good morning and my condolences to the Galichs, to Lorna and her children, and Jerry's children, of course, and grandchildren and family. It's my privilege to say a few words about dear friend Jerry. Jerry and Lorna became friends through the UCE in 1981, and many, as you already have heard, wonderful times occurred over the years. Fond memories of parties, and did I mention parties? Visiting over drinks, did I mention drinks? Of choice in our prospective homes, and also including other things such as travel to Vermont, Italy, and Christmas time drives to Woodstock, Illinois, all come to mind and always offered laughter and good times. One special event was on birthdays, when Jerry would call, and the first thing I heard was him playing Happy Birthday on his trumpet, and then he'd hang up. And I think, I must know that person. As for travel, of the many memorable moments that happened on a trip to Italy in September of 2002, two particular things stand out. 4 of us rented a Fiat sedan with a 5-gear shift. Both Jerry and I knew how to work the clutch and shift, and Lorna and my deceased partner, John, he wasn't deceased then, offered moral support. One of our destinations was Lake Como. Jerry started the drive, and all was going wonderfully well until we had to go in reverse. After many efforts and accompanying clutch work, we couldn't back up. Discussion prevailed with a few naughty words. Eventually, we decided that I would reach from the back seat and synchronize the dual effort to move into gear. He would say, "Okay, clutch in and get ready." Jerry would then announce it was my turn, and I felt my way through the shift pattern, and we would back up. It was a team effort, and it worked. From that discovery onward, the whole time, Jerry would announce his intention to back up, and I would reach from the rear seat to assist. We were all elated with the results. The story remains long after the trip, and we laughed for years. Another stellar performance of Jerry's ingenuity was observed after a long walk in the Cinque Terre above the Ligurian Sea. It was a hot day, and his feet were killing him. And finally, they hurt so seriously that after a few stops and limping to a place where we could get off the trail, we returned to the hotel in Tulare. A little later, a visit to his and Lorna's room revealed Jerry soaking his much happier feet in the bidet. A perfect place to soothe sore feet. Who knew? He was so much happier after the spa treatment. A few years later, Christmas time often included a drive to Richmond and Woodstock off of Route 176, not too far from here. One time, Jerry and Lorna found a gift for one of their grandchildren, and they were always buying gifts for their grandchildren, so that was very fun. Unfortunately, it didn't fit in their car unless it stretched through the back seat into the front. And it was crammed in there. So Hal and I got in kind of like this and were surrounded by this gift that they had bought that had to be partly dismantled to get it into the car. And we did it. And then the stories from there just rolled on, and we had many more that could be told. But what remains is the celebration of a man who loved his family, friends, parties, parades, the adventure of living fully and lovingly. I regret I can't put the gear shift into reverse just one more time and rewind fate's clock.
heart's beating out of my chest. My goodness. That was amazing, you guys. I mean, I'd love one, but I'm not ready. So many amazing stories. It is amazing to see all of you here. I will keep it brief, because as oldest grandchild, I have quite a few that I could tell as well. So, a very short poem for the most amazing grandfather I could ever have asked for. Papa was one cool cat. Artist, trumpet player, instigator, and he will keep me laughing. Thank you.
I'm Sam. I'm the second oldest grandchild. And that is my sister right there. You said brief and you weren't joking. So I'm going to share some thoughts and stories from us grandkids that paint a picture of Jerry, a man that us grandkids found exceedingly easy to love. And looking around the room, I see a lot of faces, which tells a lot about who Jerry was. He was a creative soul who had no problem talking to anyone unless they were a Republican. And if you knew Jerry, then you probably know why. I think Owen really put it best, though, when he said that Jerry wore his personality on his sleeve. If you never had the pleasure of waking up to one of his blaring reveille musings, then I'm sure you received at least one phone call close to your birthday, if not on it, with a beautifully improvised version of Happy Birthday. Even if you missed the day, it still made you feel special to receive those calls. His love of trumpeting inspired me to take up the horn. For about a decade, I played it seriously. And some of those years are punctuated with wonderful duets, masterful coaching from Papa, and every single time we played, his passion came through. Up until the end, he was trying to find the silver bullet of trumpet playing, how to pick up the horn and position the embouchure just right so you could play without warming up. He spent years trying to figure this out, and he spent just as much time laughing at himself trying to get it right, because spoiler alert, he didn't find it. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, can't. That's what he said. Undoubtedly, you knew a man who loved to laugh. From coaxing a joke out of you every time he saw you, to roping you into a scheme of coming up with a punchline to his classic joke that started, 2 Unitarians walk into a bar. Or maybe you heard him exclaim that the frost is on the pumpkin, and frankly, none of us know what that means. But if you have an idea, please see me afterwards. Figure that one out. Owen also knew Papa as a man who knew how to handle difficult situations. One Christmas, many years ago, Owen was out shopping with his brother, Reardon, Mom, Abby, and Jerry. And Abby was keen on getting an omelet pan for Tom, but what Abby didn't know was that Owen knew that Tom knew that Abby wanted a pan too and had beaten her to getting it. Owen, of course, began to panic. RJ tried to calm him down, and the brothers began to scheme on how to fix the situation, and they managed to come up with nothing at all to solve it. So instead, they turned to the only sensible solution, Jerry. If anyone knew how to avoid disaster, it would be him. Owen told Papa what was going on. He was, after all, wise. He had a long, extensive list of life experiences to draw on, and he knew his daughter. Surely, if anyone could save Christmas, it was him. Relief swept over Owen when Papa agreed to solve everything. And you can imagine the worry that started to creep back as Abby went to the kitchen department and Jerry remained where he was, steadfastly shopping for something completely different, oblivious to the impending disaster. And Owen went and reminded him of the mission at hand, and with an, "Oh, right," Jerry calmed all worry. He had just forgotten. Now, with his mind back on track, he went to Abby and did nothing. Our grandfather was no help at all. Christmas came and, of course, wasn't ruined. Everyone laughed at the pair of pans exchanged, and Owen pawned off guilt by saying, "I tried to stop you from buying it, but I couldn't get you to stop. And anyways, Papa was no help at all. He knew about it and didn't do anything." With a big smile, he laughed in a way that said, "Well, what was I supposed to do?" That day, Owen realized that our grandfather was wise. He had mastered the art of mastering a doomed situation. I think, right? I think the phrase, if you can do something about it, do it, and if not, don't worry, really applies here. And Jerry had a passion for life. His affinity for the arts drew everyone around him close to him. All of his grandkids gravitated toward him, and Addie has christened him as her favorite. Though his competition is a Libyan war criminal, a bipolar hoarder, and Lorna. And to be clear, Lorna is not the first two, okay? Papa was and always will be special to Addie. Maybe because he really took the time to hammer some lessons home. Chief among them, confirmed that the clear liquid in the cup that you asked him for was actually water. Just in case it wasn't. 7-year-old Addie could have been saved 7 minutes of mouth rinsing if she had. And to this day, 12 years later, she never touches straight vodka. Another lesson was that it wasn't normal to sip gin at 10 a.m. And frankly, it shouldn't be normal to sip gin, but that was Jerry, and probably some of you. And maybe this is one of those Frosted on the Pumpkin situations. He did manage to impart some artistic knowledge, too. When Addie was 9 years old, barely getting over the previous incident, Papa hit her with some wisdom. He looked her straight in the eyes and said in his somewhat raspy voice, "You ought to learn how to draw a perfect circle every time. Picture drawing boobs. It works. And you get to picture boobs." My lesson was different. He might have missed the target audience with that one. I don't know. But maybe that's why he always had a smile on his face and knew how to draw a perfect circle. If you want to know my lesson, you can ask me later. It's the thing on the card here. But the pumpkin thing is really starting to make some sense. His smile stayed with him every day. While writing the speech, the image I had in my mind was him in their old Hartzell house smiling. I rarely saw him frown, but he was never shy to cry. When Abby broke up with her first serious boyfriend, Papa empathized and cried with her, even when everyone else didn't know what to do. And it was just the right thing. When my mom passed away, he was going through so much turmoil, but he still had love to give, and he helped myself and my sister through that. He knew how to provide solace during the dark, depressing times. We all wish we could have said goodbye to him in person, or to have another of his strong bear hugs that ended with a prickly kiss on the cheek. But today we remember the man who was sweet, loving, honest, and a little bit sauced, but never without a smile. He will be missed, but never forgotten.
You're right, Abby. He would have really hated to miss this party. And he would have relished hearing all these fun stories. As Lorna said when I spoke to her after Jerry died, that he didn't deserve to go the way that he did. He really didn't. But he deserved this. He deserved to be honored. He deserved to be remembered. He deserved to be shared, for us to share these stories and to celebrate him. So as we close, I invite us into a moment of prayer. Spirit of life, source of love, God of many names and mystery beyond all namings, we are grateful to be together for this time of remembering and celebrating Jerry. He touched the lives of everyone in this room in endless ways, and his impact will remain. His bright smile, his joyous laugh, his playfulness and humor, his artistry and music. Your absence leaves an empty space that we will strive to fill with our gratitude for life and for having you in ours. Let us hold one another in our grief so that we may continue to love boldly even as we reckon with loss. May we continue to experience life with joy and good humor as Jerry did, for that is how we honor him most faithfully. I shared these words of the Irish poet John O'Donoghue. Though we need to weep your loss, you dwell in that safe place in our hearts where no storm or night or pain can reach you. Let us not look for you only in memory where you would grow lonely, we would grow lonely without you. You would want us to find you in presence, beside us when beauty brightens, when kindness glows and music echoes eternal tones. When orchids brighten the earth, darkest winter has turned to spring. May this dark grief flower with hope in every heart that loves you. May you continue to inspire us to enter each day with a generous heart, to serve the call of courage and love until we see your beautiful face again in that land where there is no separation, where all tears will be wiped from our mind, and where we will never lose you again. As we extinguish the flame of our chalice, let us remember that love remains and holds us together with all things. Let us carry this flame and the memory of Jerry and his many gifts with us in our hearts. Spirit of life, let our faith in the power of love remain, and may we continue to live with truth, beauty, and wonder. May we be a blessing to each other and to all the lives we touch. Before our service concludes with our final musical remembrance, the family would like to invite you to stay for food and refreshments at the back and to share your stories and memories of Jerry.